Hello, void and all who inhabit it. It's me, and thank you for 10,000 subscribers. This is not the 10K special, although if you want a say on what that topic will be, make sure you fill out the poll linked below. I used to make these 10-minute thought videos on Patreon, and I felt pulled to make one for Saltburn because I watched it twice within a week and this energy needs to go somewhere. I usually provide even less context than usual, if you can imagine, for 10-minute thoughts, but set in England in the mid-2000s, Saltburn follows a young university student who becomes infatuated with his wealthy schoolmate who invites him to spend the summer at his eccentric family's estate. It's been described as a gothic film, and some elements of the film make that very obvious. However, the most interesting gothic aspect of the film is also the most underdeveloped. Saltburn constructs its monstrous other through the characters Oliver and Farley, whose name is spelt with an E-I-G-H and which I need you to know. I know everyone wants to talk about Oliver rimming the bathtub drain, but Oliver's relationship with Farley is much more interesting to me. Farley is underutilized as this explicitly aggressive antagonistic force whose only real purpose is to establish a bootlicker desperate for acceptance from a family, honestly, that will never give it to him. But I think there's something missed in his relationship with Oliver. If you haven't seen this film yet, I cannot stress to you enough how fucking annoying Farley is, and how consistently prominent his existence is in the first hour of this 2.5 hour long film. The first line in the film is Farley disparaging Oliver. The two share a tutorial together. Almost every time we see Felix at school, Farley is right there, glaring at Oliver. Farley is much more openly questioning of Oliver's place than, say, Duncan, the head butler. Again, I think we could have seen more than the gatekeeper is often someone left outside the gates. There's a big question of motivation in the film, of why Oliver chooses to do everything he does, and I think it could have been answered through his relationship with Farley more than his relationship with Felix. However, Oliver and Felix's relationship is frequently described as one of love and hate. Emerald Fennell, the writer and director of the film, has stated that there is a strange allure to people we despise that is interesting to tap into, that she wanted to explore within this film. I'm a bit biased here, shocking, I know, but the frenemies setup, the frenetic appeal to someone you abhor, does not make sense to me. It could, and I think there are stories where it has made sense, but Saltburn is kind of just like, you've been obsessively interested in someone you hate before, right? And it's like, no, not really. Admittedly, Oliver and Felix's relationship is shallow because Felix is shallow. He pities Oliver, and Oliver in turn uses that to his advantage for as long as possible, and that's kind of it. But in returning to this question of motivation, early in the film, Farley says to Oliver, how we argue is just as important as what we argue, right before Oliver finds Felix with a flat tire, if I remember correctly. When I caught that line on my second watch, and before I even had read the interview with Fennell, I started to wonder if that was Oliver's whole point, to make an argument that would give him everything he wanted. It's very much,
why do all of this other than because you can?
Which even in that, there's something about the fact that Oliver can do all of this, that he can get the family's attention and love and care to the point at which he is able to manipulate them at a level untapped by man before, and Farley can't at all. That I feel like at the very least, Oliver would have rubbed his success in Farley's face. But before we even get to Oliver winning, again, that line that Farley says in their tutorial, how we argue is just as important as what we argue. That rhetoric is not just the contents of the claim, but the way that you present it. It made me start to wonder if Farley was who flipped the switch for Oliver. Was Oliver just so pissed off by Farley in particular, by this kid who showed up very braggadociously, that Oliver was moved to do something extreme and found that creating a connection with Felix was the easiest way to do that? I'm so focused on Farley because his end is so abrupt and anticlimactic. As I just said, I think Oliver would have rubbed his success in Farley's face, but once Farley gets kicked out of the house after Felix's death, we literally never see nor hear of him ever again. In a sense, it reflects how the rest of the characters see him. Felix and Venetia find Farley spoiled and ungrateful. Oliver basically calls the man a clown. Oliver may know he is low, but he knows Farley is even lower. And his ending, the end of Farley's story, that so quickly removes him, I think is in line with characters who don't want to deal with him and can dismiss him just as easily. But it feels very incongruous to have such a loud character have an arc that fizzles out without any follow-up. Even the father gets a hastily pieced together obituary for the end of the film. Farley just disappears without a second thought. I think Fennell was really intentional with crafting Farley as a gatekeeper of status that he himself is excluded from, and that's about it. As such, the way that Farley is shaped throughout the film is really indicative of the issue that I have with the story as a whole. I mentioned earlier that Fennell in an article talked about the appeal of the abhorrent that she finds compelling. It's a Vanity Fair article that hopefully is on the screen right now, where specifically Fennell talks about her favorite thing being sympathy for the devil. And after reading that, I was like, who is the devil in Saltburn that we are meant to sympathize with? For the first 2/3 of the film, Oliver is perhaps a stand-in for the audience, falling in love with a cruel and unfair family, until he in turn becomes the cruel person we then have to question our sympathy towards, in a way that maybe then makes us pivot to having sympathy for the family, for the devil that Oliver has fallen in love with. To me, however, the more sympathetically abhorrent person is Farley, who, by the way, in that aforementioned sympathy for the devil setup that happens with Oliver's twist, I don't think Farley is included in that batch of people we should feel bad for, because he's dismissed so quickly, because he is so fucking annoying for the whole film, because he is so openly antagonistic and openly embarrasses Oliver at multiple points in the story. I do not think that when Oliver has his turn, the story wants us to feel bad for Farley. Admittedly, however, I might just find Farley to be the more sympathetically abhorrent person of this entire cast of characters, because I think there is some obvious rationale to Farley's behavior that can be sympathetic. He's not just a gatekeeper of status, he's an outsider in his own family, and he's trying to find a spot, and he feels threatened by the introduction of Oliver, for better or for worse. This all kind of brings me back to my point that Farley as a character is reflective of an issue that I have with the film, because I think Saltburn has the same problem Promising Young Woman had, which is the way that the film constructs sympathy, how cruelty is positioned, and whose cruelty is framed as worth punishing. This isn't to say that I think Oliver should have lost, for example, or that I think Farley should have been the main character, but rather that I think Fennell's statements on sympathy and cruelty are maybe not as compelling as her visuals are. I don't think sympathy for the devil, resulting in a narrative that pushes us to be disgusted or annoyed by the person in the story with the least amount of power, is anything radical or groundbreaking. In an early draft for the script of this video, I was going to entitle it, "Now That's How You Eat the Rich." Funny haha, But upon further reflection, I realized that Saltburn can actually slide quite nicely into the growing canon of films that want us to worry about the rich, worry about the people who are eating them in a fear-based way. Like,
look, there is someone more carnivorous than this powerful person we're primed to abhor, and that's truly disturbing.
Girl, to you, I'm not concerned about that. I'm worried about the very thin line between acutely critiquing people who place others on pedestals to the point at which they have an unhealthy relationship, an unbalanced relationship, and positioning those who critique privileged people as the root of the problem, because that criticism is inherently unhealthy. I think the barrier between those two trains of thought can get muddied, but especially so when the writer-director makes a statement about having sympathy for the devil in a film that is full of devilish people. If you made it to the end, thank you for making it to the end. I already know this is more than 10 minutes. The title is just a goal, not a true measure of whatever. Anyway, let me know if y'all would be interested in more of these 10-minute thoughts. As I mentioned at the top, I used to do a lot of them on Patreon. I'm always trying to watch a bunch of stuff, but I don't always have like 45 minutes worth of thoughts on what I'm looking at, and sometimes can just like have one train of thought that I can talk about for 10 to 15 to 20 minutes. Also, before you mention it, I already know that some people have compared this film to The Talented Mr. Ripley. I've never seen that film, which is kind of funny because I have both read The Price of Salt and watched Carol and watched Do Revenge, which is low-key based off of Strangers on a Train. Haven't watched or read The Talented Mr. Ripley though, but maybe I'll add it to the list to get back to it, let you know what I thought. But I think too, maybe people are just thinking of like another film where the poor guy, literally the poor man, is up to no good. This is getting long. This part is not scripted. This is truly train of thought. How are y'all? What are you watching? Let me know your thoughts, feelings, life updates in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe. I'll catch you in the next echo chamber.